class. This is Professor Suarez bringing you class number 2, and I'm super excited to be here and give you guys the second class of your personal finance course. Now, last week we talked about some of the key concepts behind uh, income and expense and setting a personal finance goal. And what we're going to be talking about now is really the idea of savings and credit, right? And how they both tie in together. We talked briefly about the opportunity cost that's associated with perhaps spending some time doing one thing versus another, but there is an opportunity cost that's always available with savings, right? So we're going to discuss that and then seeing how we could use credit to kind of balance that out. So let's go ahead and get started. Announcements. Some of the graded assignments, which include discussion boards and the quizzes, I'm going to be posting up those grades soon. If you haven't done so already, make sure that you do the 2 to 3 discussion boards that we already have been doing, and make sure that you do every quiz because that is a part of your grade, right? The final project outline is really, it's just questions that are geared towards helping you get a lot of the ideas that are behind personal finance clarified, and just to kind of help guide a lot of your thoughts. What I tend to find is that people who do this outline are able to transfer the information to the final project or the final assignment a lot easier. And also it helps to get you in the mindset of what do I need to be focusing on if I want to develop my personal finance goal and really refine my skills in personal finance. As far as the exam, we have an exam next week. It's going to be on chapter 1, 2, and 4. I'll post a review with the exam so that way you guys can study the terms. And you want to make sure that anything you don't understand, you contact me as soon as possible. As far as the quiz for chapter 4, I'm going to be posting that next week as well. Also, if you miss an assignment due date, or if you find that you weren't able to hand in the assignment on time, I just want to clarify there's only a 10% penalty on tardiness. The only time I won't accept it is if it's already a week after the assignment is due, like the discussion board or the quizzes. But if you contact me and let me know, we could always try to work something out, and I could see if I could open quizzes for you if you are having trouble getting them on time. The last thing I want you guys to do is to fail because you guys weren't able to take the quiz for extenuating circumstances. So just contact me and we'll be able to work it out, right? So some of the key saving principles that's discussed in the book are associated with really the discipline of setting aside money or assets that can be made either liquid or setting it aside for future expenses or emergencies, right? And they have some guidelines, or they have some suggestions how to do that. I mean, even in the first video for your discussion board, there was some ideas that were floating around. I mean, as far as things that you decide to do, you really have to pick something that you're comfortable with doing. It's ideally, if you could save 20% of every check that you get in, that'd be great, right? Some people aren't in the circumstances to be able to do that. Some people can only put $1 away. But just setting that aside, and it's really a discipline, right? And it's really about, the same way you brush your teeth every day, the same way that you may floss, the same way that you fix your bed. Saving money is your way of paying yourself. And if that's something that is hard for you to do, sometimes getting people to hold you accountable to it, like a friend or a family member, a wife, a spouse, those are really the things that help us to do it, right? And the other thing that really helps to kind of solidify it is the goals that we set. And I know for some people it might be like, yeah, I have a goal of buying a car, right? And if you don't meet your goal of buying the exact car you want, you say, oh, with whatever money I have, I'll sell it for something else. But if you make it real, if you make it visible, if you make it visceral for yourself and you imagine yourself doing it, I think the pain associated with not doing it becomes more real. And that kind of gives you the fire, the kick in the butt to say, you know what, let me put this $20 in the savings account. Let me go ahead and set an automatic transfer for my checking to the savings at the end of the month. Whatever it is you decide to do, but I think you have to make the pain of not being able to save real for yourself. The other thing that's associated with savings is the time value of money, right? So, like we said in the last video before, a dollar today is more valuable than a dollar tomorrow, or a dollar today is more valuable than a dollar next week. So thinking about what is it that I get out of putting this money away, aside from just saving for the future or putting it for a reward that I'm going to get later, that's really something that you need to take into account, especially when it comes to where you put your money. Because it's really associated with the opportunity cost given up by not utilizing the money today. Also take into account with the depreciation of assets or even the inflation percent that's associated with money, you really don't want to be putting it into an account that gives you no interest or very little interest, because at the end of the day you're going to be losing money or losing value by not using it, right? So some of your options when it comes to savings include banks, credit unions, and even some investment companies, right? So let's talk about banks. Banks come in many different shapes and sizes, right? The main one that you guys are probably familiar with is retail. And retail includes anything like Bank of America, Chase, Citi, TD Bank, right? And these are banks that offer everything. They're like a Costco of financial services. So they have checking accounts, savings account, CDs, right? Sometimes they even offer investments, and they bundle it up in such a way that it's convenient for you because it gives you easy access to your funds, right? The reason that they're able to do it low cost too, or as a low cost to you, is because they have what's called economies of scale. They have large banks, large infrastructures that span across different states and different continents that allow you to have, again, easy access to your money, right? But then you have other types of banks which are online, which leverage the fact that there's all these retail banks out there, and you know what they say, we don't need a physical bank. We'll give you 1% on a checking account, 2% on the CD. We'll give you the rates that you want. In return, you deposit your money with us. And really, you know, the big draw to these banks is they have a low cost, right? They have a low overhead. So any money that they get from taking your money and investing it and earning a profit on it, a good percentage of it's going to come back to you. And then you have the local banks, right? And these banks don't have the economies of scale, which just means they don't have the large infrastructure that, say, a Bank of America or a TD Bank has, right? But they have some of the functions that the retail banks have, so they can offer a checking, a savings, CDs, right? And then, you know, give you a better rate because, again, they're trying to compete with the retail and the online banks. So they sometimes offer pretty high rates on their accounts as well, right? So it's also important to understand that with banks, when you put your money in the savings account, the money doesn't stay there. The banks in turn go ahead and lend it to other consumers who are interested in maybe buying houses or cars, right? Or what they'll do is they'll invest it in companies and get earnings on the assets or on the value of those said companies, right? So really, you know, the interest that you're getting is based on, sometimes it's variable, which means that the interest rates go up and down, and it's tied to the market, right? So you something like a money market savings account, it's kind of implying the name that the interest rate is based on how well the market is doing, right? And in other cases, it's based on how effective they are at lending to people who are going to pay it back. And we get into this a little bit later when we talk about credit cards, right? So then you have credit unions, right? And these were established by unions of workers, of military people, or groups of individuals who had financial needs, but felt like the banks didn't have their best interests at heart. So often these groups were established with the benefits of the intended group in mind. And membership has now become more flexible. So things like credit unions for military is not limited to people who are in the military. Sometimes extended family could be a part of military credit unions, or even extended family. People who knows a guy that was in like the Navy could be a part of this, because again, maybe the original intention was for the groups that needed these financial services, but as time later progressed, they were looking to make more profit, make more revenue, and they decided to expand their products to individuals like you and me. And what does that result in? It results in higher rates on some of the savings and checking accounts, and lower rates on some of the credit card interest rates when people borrow against it. Okay? And last but certainly not least, you have investment companies, firms like Schwab or Fidelity, Merrill Lynch. And these are companies that take your assets and invest it in the market. They also offer vehicles where it's hands-off, like money market savings accounts. And instead of you managing the assets, or a manager managing the assets, what they do is they invest it in a mutual fund, and they give you an interest rate based on the performance of that mutual fund, right? Which takes a load off of you, because you're guaranteed a certain rate based on the historic performance. And at the same time, in most cases, most savings accounts are FDIC insured, which means that the value of the funds are protected. So God forbid anything happens with the firm, you're guaranteed your money back up to $250,000. And these are products that are offered in banks, in credit unions, and in investment companies. So these are some of the options that I'm highlighting today. So some of the benefits and disadvantages associated with a savings account is the fact that you're able to have a low cost option for emergencies, right? And this is referring to the emergency savings. Now the book and a lot of experts usually recommend having 6 to 8 months of savings just set aside just in case, because you never know. Sometimes there's unforeseen costs that you can't predict or you can't plan around. So it's important having that set aside. The second aspect to take into account is the interest, right? What are you getting back for the money that you're putting away? And I remember back in the day, there were savings accounts that were open for 6%. And if you use the rule of 72, right? Divide 72 by 6, that's about 12 years. So if you have a savings account with an annual percentage yield of 6%, it would take 12 years for whatever amount you put in to double, right? Which is fantastic if you have $10,000 set aside in the savings account. 12 years from now, it would be $20,000. That's not the case anymore. Right now, most interest rates are at 0.1, 0.01, 0.02, and these rates are tied and correlated to the prime rate, or the Fed rate, right? So if you guys follow the news, they are talking about raising the Fed rate. They haven't even raised the Fed rate. The last rate increase that I remember was in July, and it wasn't even substantial. It was like 0.5%. So, interest, you have to finagle and you have to shop around to get a good rate. And some of the good rates that I've seen is like 1%, 1.5%. Hopefully that changes in the near future. But there's things that need to happen in the economy before that can happen. The other aspect that's associated with savings accounts is the fact that it's a risk-free option. In most cases, you experience virtually no loss. And the reason I mean in most cases is there is that inflationary rate factor, right? So any money put into an account is going to have to stay there. And if you put it in a CD, which is a certificate of deposit, they keep it locked in for a period of time. And if you take it out, they charge you a fee for it, right? So in that period where the money is set aside, you would hope that it would gain value through the interest. But the reality is aspects like inflation, where the value of that dollar goes down over time, makes it so that way, the money you have set aside, once you take it out 7 months from now, it's not going to be worth the same amount that it was when you first put it in. And an example would be if you put, let's say for example, if you put $100 in a 7-month CD today, right? What you could buy with those $100, let's say there's a basket of stuff that you could buy for that. It would cost you $100 today. 7 months later, let's say the price of gas goes up. So it costs the companies more money to ship the same products in that basket. So who's going to front the cost? Is it going to be them? No, they're going to raise the price for it. So 7 months later, you take out your $100, you try to buy the same basket of goods. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to afford it. And this is the risk that's associated with putting the money into the account. The fact that it's risk-free is because inflation is about, on average, it's about 2% with the dollar, right? So you're not losing a substantial amount, right? If you were worried about losing $100,000 or $200,000, like I said before, most of these products are FDIC insured. So God forbid anything happens to the bank, your money is returned to you for the full value of what it's worth. And last but certainly not least, it's a place to keep your money safe. There were so many cases back in the day about people putting money in their mattress and then there was a house fire and they lost all their valuables, including the money in the mattress. So having the money set aside into a checking account where you can easily access it with a debit card, or even a savings account where it's a little bit harder to get access to, but at least you know it's safe, is another benefit to having the savings account. And fact of the matter is, you're less likely to have your stuff stolen if it's in the bank. The other aspect or disadvantage, like I was talking about before, is the low savings rate. They're so low. Major banks are able to borrow from the Federal Reserve at a substantially lower rate, so they don't need our capital, they don't need our cash to lend it out and make money off of it, right? And then you take into account the variable rates. What that means is if you open a savings account and they have a variable rate, that means at any moment they have the freedom to change the rate that they're offering. So if the economy does good, in most cases the rates should go up. If the economy does bad, the rates can go down. We haven't gotten to the point where we have negative interest rates, but if that were to happen, it would be to your disadvantage to save your money at a bank, right? Then you have the liquidity factor, and liquidity just means the ability to turn your assets into cash, or to turn your capital into something that you could buy or utilize it to purchase something. And when it's locked into an account or locked into an investment, there's a process that goes into making it liquid and getting access to it, and some fees associated with it, which is something to take into account. And last but certainly not least, products offered at financial institutions work on a suitability principal and not a fiduciary, which means that if it gives the bare minimum as far as what you need and what you require, then legally it's suitable. And a person like a banker or a financial advisor from some of these institutions can offer it to you as if it were the best product and not be legally held accountable for maybe offering you something that's not to your best benefit. Fiduciary, on the other hand, which we talked about in the first class, they have your best interests at heart, right? So, you'll go into this bank, and this has happened to me plenty of times, and they'll say, oh, Mr. Suarez, they're offering you a credit card with 0% interest for the first 12 to 15 months. Little do they know about me or whether I need a credit card, but they felt the need to offer me that product. Suitability. If they were fiduciary, they would ask questions like, how many credit cards do you have? When was the last time you applied for credit? I don't know, do you have a need for credit right now, or do you need money to have access to money in case of an emergency? All these questions take into account fiduciary. And then at that point, if they say, you know what, there's a product here that I think you could benefit from, would you be interested in taking a look at it? That's fiduciary. They're taking into account my needs and what I want. And unfortunately, the financial institutions don't do that. And that's really something you should take into account, especially when you open these accounts, right? So specific advantages, right? If you go to page 117, they give you a graph and chart about the different benefits associated with each kind of savings account or type of option that you have, right? But remember, when the book was printed, I mean, they're using rates of 5%, 6%. So this is back when I was a kid, right? The rates are very, very low. Then you have TIPS, which are Treasury inflation protected securities, right? And these are Treasury bonds. So Treasury bonds are also risk-free because they're backed by the government. And the reason that they're risk-free is, if you think about it, the only way you would lose your investment is if the government were to go out of business. And chances are America is not going to go out of business, because if they owed money and they needed to make more money, what could they do? They just charge more taxes, right? So virtually risk-free. They offer TIPS for 5-year or 10 years. And there are also mutual funds that deal strictly with Treasury bonds. So if you don't want to go out and buy Treasury bonds, you could actually invest in a mutual fund that invests in it, primarily in just Treasury bonds. And we'll go over this a little bit more in the future when we talk more about investment. The last, and certainly not least, is the institutional banks. And they're, again, insured, like I said before, they're insured not to fail. So, and you also want to make sure that it doesn't mean that if you put your money in a self-directed investment account, right, which means that you're directing where you invest the funds, you're not insured if you lose the money. You're only insured if the firm that you have your savings account, your CD, or your deposit account in fails. And that could be from issuing bad loans, or investing in companies that don't offer value, right? There's plenty of reasons why the banks could fail. But for whatever reason, if they do fail, they insure the money that you have put into their savings, deposits, and CDs. Another option that I think is very important to talk about and just introduce you guys to are pensions and 401ks, right? So pensions are tax incentivized retirement savings, often paid for by the employer. It's a promise to be paid after retirement for the rest of your life. So it's a great deal. I mean, if you work in a job that gives you a pension, what tends to happen is after you retire, whatever it is that you earn, that that company will pay that for you until you leave this world. So you don't have to worry about not having money coming in, which is great, right? But then as a company, it's actually pretty expensive, right? Because having that payroll on the company and not having the ability to get anything out of it, it's free labor, pretty much, or it's free money for no labor. So companies actually stray more towards the 401k, right? Which is or a 403b plan, which are also tax incentivized for retirement savings, but they're paid for by the employee, and the employee puts a certain amount into the 401k, and the employer matches that fund up to a certain percentage, right? So with these two options, it's really easy to start saving and getting more value for what you're putting into it, right? Now, based on my research, these are not risk-free investments, right? These are not risk-free savings options, unfortunately, because as we have seen in 2008, the market can collapse, or the market could falter, and these types of accounts, pensions and 401ks and 403bs, are contingent on the performance of the market, because they take this money and again invest it in mutual funds, in secure options, and secure investments, or quote unquote secure investments. And if they make the wrong investments, you could really lose your retirement savings and your retirement value, right? And if you lose that, how are you going to pay your bills? I mean, there's no excuses for not paying bills, unfortunately. There's nothing you could say where the bill collector is going to be like, no, I know that you're 80 years old and you can't work, but, in order for me to give you electricity, you got to pay for it, right? So taking that into account, taking into really thinking about the pain associated with being old and not having any money versus being old and being able to travel and really enjoy your life and being able to give back to your family, thinking about that should really be motivation to put money away into either a 401k or a pension for your future. And the reality is, looking into whoever's managing these types of accounts, that they have a fiduciary obligation to you. And I'm going to keep highlighting this. I'm going to keep drilling this home, because fiduciary is really the only way, or the only standard that you should hold anybody managing your finances. So there's a trade-off of what you want today and what you need tomorrow. And deciding which one to pick is based on really your own personal preference and the pressure associated with making the purchases, right? And Teresa Ghilarducci says we should rely on ourselves and the systems we set up to protect us, i.e. Social Security and pension. And what that really means is the only person who could save for tomorrow, the only person who could prepare for retirement, and the only person who truly cares about you and your future is you. And if you can't do that for yourself, nobody else is going to do it. And that's a reality that you have to take into account when you are managing your funds and your finances and dealing with some of these people when you open these accounts, because they're going to try to sell you the moon and try to give you the world. And when you end up in that situation or in those accounts, you're going to realize, man, these people really gutted me just for a couple bucks on their check, you know? We covered income, we slightly covered budget, setting goals is very important. And the last aspect that we're talking about now this week is spending and credit, right? On this video, I want to speak about how do you determine the proper amount of credit you should use, and I want to make sure that you guys know the steps on how to come to that number, right? So step one is setting up a financial goal, right? And this usually follows setting up just goals, things that you want, material things or non-material things that you want out of your life, and really asking the question, what is that going to cost me? And then at that point, once you have a number, you set a financial goal. I want to make this much by this time period. I want to have this much set aside during this time period. I want to reduce my spending in this area by 15%. The second step is estimate income. So in general, you want to try to figure out how much do I need to make, or how much am I going to make during that time period. Then within that makeup of what you determine that magic number to be, you're going to budget an emergency fund and savings. So you're going to save up on the offshoot that some horrible or not great thing may happen, and you could use the trends in spending or what you spent last year in emergencies to really come up with a number that's appropriate, right? And then you want to budget fixed expenses. Now, fixed expenses include rent, gas, insurance, utilities, the things that you cannot function if you don't pay. And then you want to budget, step 5, budget the variable expenses. These are things that may come up or may change all the time, like gas, food, groceries, and set a budget for what's the appropriate amount to spend. Eating out, going on dates, having fun with friends, whatever it is, you have to set a budget and set a discipline so that way you can reach your goal. And step 6, which is probably the best advice, is record your spending amounts and record what you're spending on, keeping track. Because then you feel it more. If you just swipe a card, you're like, whatever, I have enough. But if you're spending and you're taking into account, oh, wow, I only have $5 in my account. Maybe I shouldn't get this McChicken sandwich, or maybe I shouldn't get this second scoop of ice cream, whatever it is, But once you're documenting it and keeping record, you start to become conscious of your habits, and then your spending or your unconscious or impulsive spending starts coming into the consciousness, and you're thinking about it and it's really seeing what triggers the behaviors to doing things that you don't want to do and spending on things you don't want to spend on, which is the whole concept of personal finance and really being good at it. So now the uses and misuses of credit, right? So here's some 3 questions that you always want to ask before you use a credit card. Do I have the cash I need for the down payment? And what this really is saying is, if I put this on the credit card, can I, if God forbid I don't get the amount I need in my future check, like my next check. Let's say I was expecting to get paid $1,000 and then I only get paid $800. Do I still have enough cash in my checking account to pay the credit card in full, right? Because that would probably determine maybe I shouldn't use my credit card, right? The other question is, do I want to use my savings? Would it be more expensive to leave the money in my account, or to pay the interest back with the credit card? And what I mean is, if you have $100 in your savings account and leaving it in that savings account is going to cost you about 20 cents in inflation, right? I mean, come on, don't leave it in the savings account. Just use your savings, like, because if you're gonna put it on if you're gonna put it on the credit card and you're getting charged 24% interest per year, leaving a $100 balance for a month, that's $2. 20 cents, $2. Would you rather pay 20 cents or would you rather pay $2? I think I'd rather pay the 20 cents, and I'll go ahead and deal with that. So the other time that you want to use the credit card is if by taking out of the savings account, you're missing out on the opportunity to get interest. So when the interest was 5%, people said, you know what, instead of taking out the money from my savings account, maybe getting a fee for taking it out, I'm just going to put it on my credit card. Not even worry about it. I know I'm going to get paid next week. It doesn't even matter. So that's the second question you want to ask. And the third, could I postpone the purchase? Do I need it right now? In most cases, you're going to tell yourself, no, I don't need it right now. You're not going to buy it. You're not going to spend it. You're going to have the money that you want for something that's more important, right? Versus buying another video game or buying a new phone or buying a new Apple Watch, whatever it is. Like, you're not going to splurge if you say, man, I could probably buy this later. And you're going to feel good when you buy it later because you're going to realize, man, I'm so glad I didn't waste my money on something stupid, you know? So these questions really allow you to take into account and make the behavior conscious versus you saying, you know what, I'm just going to swipe the card and not even think about it. No, because at that moment, you're going to be losing money, and that's the worst thing that you're gonna beat yourself up. You're gonna be resentful, and that's not an emotional state that you want to be in to be successful, right? So credit functions on three facets. It functions on character, capacity, and capital. There's a fourth C that you want to take into account, and that's collateral. And the reason that collateral is so important is because it reduces your cost to borrow. What do I mean by that? So take, for example, if you were to take out a loan at a bank, right? Something like the revolving credit that's associated with the credit card. Because it's revolving credit and because it's always open, there's a higher amount of risk associated with it. And you're probably saying, why would there be more risk just because the money's always available, right? The reason being is whatever you purchase, right? Whether it's a laptop, a flat screen TV, clothing, right? You're going to use those things. And those things are going to depreciate or lose value as you use them, right? So there's no guarantee that if you don't have the money to pay it back, that the bank's going to get it back. Yet they issue the credit for as long as the time period as you're willing to use that card, right? So that risk is always there. So in order to balance out that risk, what they do is they charge a higher interest rate. Now, for things like mortgages and auto loans, the collateral associated with it is the item that's being used to purchase those items. The item that's being purchased with the loan that's issued. So take a car, for example, right? God forbid you can't pay your auto loan. At least the bank has the car as collateral, or the car as a function or as an object that they could sell and then get their money back. You see what I'm saying? So collateral, the fourth C, is really your opportunity to reduce the cost of credit or the cost of taking out a loan, right? So when you buy things of value, that's really the time to use credit or to use loans, because what's going to happen is maybe that window of opportunity is going to escape you and you're not going to be able to purchase those items of real value. So then you borrow from a bank, or if you're a business, or if you're a potential entrepreneur or business enthusiast, you could reach out to venture capitalists or people with the assets to buy it and give up what's called equity, or give up a percentage of ownership, so that way you could really take advantage of that opportunity to purchase it. But the real reason we use credit is to develop what's called a FICO score, or a credit score. And FICO score and credit history are what companies use to determine if you would be eligible for credit. Now, people even use the FICO score if you are going to lease out an apartment or lease out a car, or even an employment. There are employers who check your credit score because it's a good determinant of the C's that we were referring to before. So having a good FICO score is not only necessary, it's crucial to be successful in today's world. To know, especially when you're dealing with credit cards and you need to read through the contracts and some of the paperwork, are these key terms. So installment versus non-installment really refers to credit and the different forms associated with credit. Now, credit doesn't just come in one form in a card. The very first financing options were installment credit, which allowed people to make installment payments on items that were too expensive to afford. Non-installment or revolving credit refers to the fact that an amount of money is always available. But this is usually associated with a larger amount charged on interest. And it's contingent on the fact that you're going to pay it back. If you don't pay it back, that right gets lost. Term refers to the time allotted to repayment. So if you have a 15-year term, that means that you have to pay back the loan or the credit in 15 years. APR is an acronym for annual percentage rate, and this is the rate of interest charged per year. Now, this is not to be confused with the fact that most credit cards charge interest per day. So they'll give you an interest rate of, let's say, 24%, but to know the actual rate of what you're being charged per day, you have to divide by 365, right? That being said, you have an item like principal, which is actually the amount that you're being charged. Principal is the amount of the loan that you're borrowing. So if you purchase an item for $100, the principal would be $100. And just to kind of put things into context, average student debt is at $30,000. But the average credit card debt is $16,000. So it's very easy to lose track of purchases and what your borrowing habits are, right? Mind you, average income is $50,000. So maybe a fifth of what you purchase is purchased with a credit card. But it's important to take account what these behaviors are and what these habits are before you let it control you, or you let it get into a point where it's uncontrollable and unmanageable, right? Not least, we're going to talk about the research-based buying approach. And why this is important primarily is because, when we're going to be spending on our credit card or our debit card, we want to make sure that we're making the right purchase. So the book highlights these 4 phases, right? So we have phase 1, identifying the problem and setting a goal. Now, why is this important? So a lot of the values and really the metrics to what we determine, or what we use to determine which items to buy, are based on our beliefs and based on how we view the world, right? So if we have a problem, so let's say communication problem, we say, you know what, I want something that's going to allow me to connect with my family, that's going to allow me to communicate easily with the people that I work with and the people I care about, but also keeps me abreast with current events. So you say to yourself, oh, you need a cell phone, right? But if those 3 things are the most important, then it doesn't matter how it looks. It doesn't matter if it's the coolest item on the market or if everybody else has it. What matters is how much it costs and if it does what it needs to do and if it's the best at doing those things. So then at that point, when you evaluate your choices, you're not evaluating it on the standards of other people. You're evaluating it on your own standards, on your own terms. So it's a lot harder for you to be convinced about something that's not good for you and to buy that thing versus, kind of going to a store and saying, you know what, I'll just let the person sell me what they feel is appropriate, what's suitable, right? So after you evaluate your choices, the third phase is selecting and actually purchasing it. And, you'll find that in most cases, you're not going to be stuck with an iPhone or a Galaxy phone of the present year. You'll probably go a couple models back and save yourself $400 to $500 just doing that, because it's the same quality phone, they have the same chip, or maybe they have a smaller screen, but it's not comparable where you're compromising what it is you truly want. And last but certainly not least, you want to be able to do the post-purchase activities and really determine whether the item you bought was the best possible option, or if you should go back and get a refund and get another option. And that's really the best way to approach buying, so that way you save your money and you're conscious about the behaviors that you're doing. Because again, what people tend to do is be undisciplined about their purchasing habits and not think about it and say, you know what, I could never be good at finance because, I don't know why I keep spending, or I'm an impulse shopper. Well, then don't be an impulse shopper. Like, think about what it is you're doing. Be conscious of the purchases you make and what motivates you, what triggers you to do those behaviors. And then once you are conscious, once you're documenting it, if there's something you want to change, you're able to do it because you know exactly what it is that you're doing, why you're doing it, what's triggering you. And you could avoid those triggers, you could change those behaviors, or you could change the beliefs that are associated with those behaviors. With that being said, my name is Professor Suarez. I want to thank you for spending the time with me to talk about personal finance, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time. We're going to be talking about income again, and kind of the reason that loans still exist. Because I know for some people, I know me personally, I said, why not just save the money and then, buy it later versus buying, borrowing so much money and paying so much interest. But there's a reason for it, and we're going to be talking about that in the next video. So again, this is Professor Suarez signing off. Thank you for joining me. Take care.